I'm going to kick it off and give you, some of you don't know Peter or have not heard of Peter, so I'll just kind of give you a little rundown. He is one of the most sought after speakers, authors, and consultant when it comes to some of the largestly publicly and privately held businesses, financial institutions, accounting, and law firm, legal firms. They've relied on him for his expert advice. He's authored 3 really large books. And one of them is the ASK, and I won't give you the full acronym for it, a comprehensive guide to succession planning and estate planning, TASK, and of course, the King of Main Street. This is the one we're going to be talking about today, and I think this is his masterpiece. Peter is an advisor that pioneered a lot of the insights and the expertise when it comes to business of succession planning, income and capital enhancement solutions. You know, he's been in the business for quite a long time, so he knows the market intricately, especially in that really super high-end side. The guy's brilliant. You know, not because I consider him a good friend, but he's taken all of that insight and he's packed it into this book, which we're going to go and we're going to try to understand and walk in his shoes, because what else is better than trying things yourself than learning from an expert? So I'm going to turn it over to Peter to kick it off and say, Peter, give us your take on this book. Where did the insight come from to put this to paper?
Okay, so I've been in the business. This September is going to be 30 years. Can you imagine that? 30 years, over 10,000 days. I've been in the financial field. Now, I've been very fortunate. I fell into this industry, and I want to share with you why. I was on my way to law school, and it was the Great Recession of the early 1990s. If you guys remember that, there was a huge change happening in society. People are no longer working at companies for life, and the baby boomers were basically this, you know, this in the Python, they were like blocking everything and being a Generation Xer. There were just 2 areas that were opening up if you had if you were smart enough to take them. One was technology, and we all know about Y2K, which the world didn't end, and also the internet was taking off back then. If you remember, there was a time before the internet. And the financial fields. Now, the financial field back in the early 1990s, the bulk of the baby boomers were starting to really get serious about retirement. And all you had to do is you could have been a monkey and made money, because, and what I mean by that is that you walk into a room, you say, I sell mutual funds, and people were like jumping all over you, because back then when you would ask people if they had investments, they say, I have RSPs, and you say, what's in your RSPs? And they say, well, it earns me interest. They didn't know that they had GICs sitting in their RSPs, because the banks had just gotten into the business of selling mutual funds, and that's where this huge transition happened. So that was a huge jump. So and we're going to be transitioning to insurance in large cases and succession planning. So when I got into the business, there was only $24 billion sitting in mutual funds, and by the end of the decade, there was $600 billion sitting in money management, because people are getting ready for retirement. Well, let's fast forward. This huge population that's about to retire, what services do they need? They are no longer into accumulation, growing their wealth. They need to maintain it, and they need to distribute it. And this is where we are right now. And this is the industry that everyone on this call is dealing with the last third of someone's life. And for a lot of people, you know, you can't talk to them about death and everything when they're young, or what's going to happen after they live, because it's all theoretical. However, in the large cases, the truth is the people who have the money, it's not money that you're looking at. You're looking, if they made it themselves, what that represents is they traded their life energy for that money. You know, when they say time is money, they don't say money is time, because the only thing that really counts is our time. So what you're doing is, this is a way, a human construct that people have actually traded their time, their life energy for. And where we are situated is to help those people live the most quality lives at the end of their lives, because that's what financial advisors and who also focus on insurance, and actually to make sure that they can create a legacy as well. And the legacy could be several things. It could be a building named after them. It could also be making sure their grandchildren are going to have money for education and private schools and things like this if they're not here. And that's a legacy. It's a responsible human being. Now, Sebastian mentioned that I had written 3 textbooks before I wrote this book. And my book was written for us. Sorry, my other books, my textbooks were written for us. And what do I mean by that? It was written for the check casher, you know, the person who signs the back of the checks. It wasn't written for the check writer, you know, the person, the people who sign the front of the checks. Now let's think about that. Each and every one of us are advisors to kings. Now, some of you have, you know, you might have an MGA and you're like, you know, you're the king and you have a real business, but most of us are just advisors to kings. You know, I can't tell my clients how to make money because they made it. However, I can help them keep the money. So let me share with you about my books and my column that I had for 17 years with the Bottom Line and Lawyers Weekly. I was writing to our audience, to, well, mostly to CPAs or CGAs, CMAs. You remember the time when they used to have all these different designations before they had the CPA? And one of my contributors to my last textbook, can I ask everyone who's not speaking if they can just mute their mics except for Sebastian? And then when we ask for questions, if you could, you know, then you can unmic and just introduce yourself. So I wrote these textbooks for us, and it was an exploration for myself. And again, my last book had 54 contributors. And I was learning from these people. Some of these people charged like over $1,000 an hour, and I was able to get like 100 hours for free. So I was being educated by the best people, and they were writing about things for me. And the focus were on my last book is, imagine you have a client who has a successful business and has a net worth over $25 million. And I would go to these top people and say, so from your vantage point, what would you do to them? Like when it came to succession planning, when it had like avoiding the family fight, you know, with like lawyers, or managing their portfolios and, you know, selling their businesses. How would, and your expertise, a lawyer, an accountant, a financial advisor, money manager, these were all like really accomplished people who wrote books. But I said, we've got someone worth $25 million. How would you deal with them? So one of the contributors I had in my book was a gentleman named Jeffrey Solomon. And this is the genesis of this book, The King of Main Street. He managed some of the largest foundations in the world. Billions and billions of dollars were part of the foundation that he was heading. And in semi-retirement, he made the decision that he was going to take over the Andrea and Charles Brofman Foundation. Now, I'm really glad that I'm speaking to a Canadian audience, because I have to explain like Seagram's and Tropicana and all that stuff to our American friends, because they don't know the Brofmans, but in Canada we do. So Charles Brofman made the pledge. And for those of you who don't know the pledge, it's like he said he was going to give away half his money while he was dead or alive. And he created a foundation that's supposed to give out all the money while he's alive. And Charles hired Jeffrey Solomon, and this was going to be a lot less work, you know, because it'd only be like $1 billion foundation instead of, let's say, $50 billion foundations. You know, it's like, hopefully, you know, we all want to slow down when we get older, right? And they wrote a book called The Art of Giving. Now, this book here, so let me just share with you, because this is a pivotal point about the book. and we're going to talk about how people are using the book and how you can read the book. But I'm sharing you my experience of why I made the decision to write the book. So I wrote my last book, Ask Advisors Seeking Knowledge, a comprehensive guide to succession and estate planning, which had 54 contributors. That was the size of the Income Tax Act. Literally, it was over 1,200 pages. I didn't write it myself. I had 54 contributors, but it was like a Dr. Spock type of book for all, for advisors. If you had a situation that would come up, you would turn to the book and you would find it. So I had Jeffrey Solomon write a chapter on how do you approach guys like Charles Brofman, us guys, like we check, we check cashiers, we're the guys who sign the back of the checks, the advisors to King. How do you approach a client like Charles Brofman or someone who's worth multi-million dollars about philanthropy? Because there's no one better to do this than Jeffrey Solomon, because this is what he's done his entire adult life. So he writes an incredible chapter. So Charles Brofman, after the book comes out, Charles Brofman's coming to speak at a special group of U of T students, and then he's going to be talking to a broader group. And I get myself invited to that small little group of these little students, and he's talking leadership. And his first book was called The Art of Giving. It was focused on the really wealthy individual and why they should give money. The second one was like, if you don't have the money, volunteer or service those people. Again, people like you and I, mere mortals. So I approached Charles Brofman after his presentation, and I want to give him my book. Now he said two things to me that, sometimes things happen to you and you just feel like it's happening to you all over again, like it's real. So I tried to give him my book, and I told him, Jeffrey Solomon, the guy who's giving away all your money, wrote a chapter on, how someone can talk to a client like you to, think philanthropy, just exactly what you're talking about right now. And he looks at me and he says, you keep it, I'm not going to read it. You can imagine the shock on my face, right? Like, it's like, wow, I pulled every bullet in my chambers to get here, and he's told me to keep the book. Okay, so that's one thing. Number two, he says something else to me that was, is the reason you have the King of Main Street. He said to me that he'd been paying guys like you and I his entire life to read books like this, so he didn't have to. Think about that. He's been paid. So when you take your insurance courses, your financial planning courses, your CLU, your tax, whatever you're taking, your clients are going to you because they don't want to do that. Because in this world, if they wanted to do it, you wouldn't have a job, right? Because they went out and did something else, and now they turn to you for your expertise. And I thought about it, and I said, I've been writing for the wrong audience. I have to write everything that I've been writing for the last 25 years, the things that I found interesting. I got to find a way to tie it in that someone like Charles Brofman would read my book. And I became obsessed with this book. I decided that I wanted it to be a legacy project. That led me on a path, and I read over, and this is something you'll find interesting. It's lots of finance in the book, but instead of like telling you this is how you do it, I show someone doing it. And I'm going to go and turn back to Sebastian asking how people have been using the book. But for me, it was a real passion project. Like, I was so obsessed with it. Like, every sentence, I hired 11 people to work on the book with me, because I wanted this book to basically say that I was here in this career in our business. Because and I'll just share with you, after I spoke to Charles Brofman, I was on the 69th floor, First Canadian Place. I just want you all to know I might be wearing a San Diego cap, but I'm fully Canadian. And I asked myself a question. I said, I know who built this building, the Reichmans, in 1972. However, I don't know who built the Scotia Tower or any of these other buildings. And I said, you know, I want to really work on something that says I was here and what I did, and maybe I can pass on wisdom. And at the same time, I also want to, instead of like hitting a client over the head saying you need to do this and that, I want to write a book that deals with psychology, deals with archetypes, and basically the client can relate to it. So when the advisor would discuss the book with the client, instead of them asking, telling them this is what you need to do, you have to take care of your family, what happens if you die, all these different things in the growth and, you know, the transition of the business. Instead of that, it's like now you're able to talk through the story and then relate it back to the client. And COVID's been an interesting time, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Sebastian, because I'll share with you what's occurred. I gave out in Toronto, I must have given out like several thousand books. You know, it was like my business card. I would just hand it out. Again, I didn't write the book to make money off of it. I can never get back my 30 years of observation. But what came out of it is exactly what you're doing, what Sebastian's doing. People took it upon themselves to start, you know, like book clubs, and they would discuss the book, and then they would discuss, they would have a point of reference, and then they would talk about their own situations. And then what they would do after they had had that experience with colleagues is they would go out to prospects, clients. They would go, you know, the CA firms and, you know, the banks. They would go out and they would give it out to their clients and have discussions with them. And the book was a primer to get the client ready to have those discussions. Instead of saying, hey, you're going to die, what's going to happen? They relate. If the book does it right, and I'm not going to tell you what happens in the book because I don't know where you are in the book, you'll be able to have those discussions with the client and use the book as a starting point, leading specifically to their situation. And you'll have the answers because you have the tools as the advisor to solve the problems that the client yet hasn't solved. And in essence, you're empowering them to do two things. And that's really what's wonderful about this business. You're going to help them make sure that the worst case scenario isn't their scenario, that you will empower them that they can now do the real important work. And I've come, as I get older and I've had some health scares, the important work is the legacy we leave, because I don't know anybody who's lived forever. So Sebastian, that's my long spiel.
And that was a long and beautiful spiel. And it, you know, there's a couple of key things that you said there. Is you got invited. You made yourself get to a point where Brofman was. So you moved whatever you needed to move to get there. And so I say it out to everyone else here on the line, is sometimes when you're looking at a certain target, you need to figure out, how do I get in front of them? And how do I pitch something? So Peter pitched a book. And of course, what did this guy say? Listen, this is not my expertise. That's what I pay guys like you for. So we've got to know the value that we bring to the table. A lot of times this is the key thing. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to embark on this, is because we've got a guy like Brent Swadek who's developed a phenomenal program to help you get into that space deeper. So we thought, you know what, Manjinder and I were speaking, and we said, with this book, with Brent's course and the team at Equitable, we could really help everyone here to get to that next level. And you know, so I think this is the opportunity, is to look at this, and it's not a book that's going to say, okay, turn to page 7 and your answer is there. No, as Peter said, it's walking it through. So Peter, I'd say to you this, is that I know a guy like Mark Halpern is using this with clients, specifically with philanthropy, because that's his core, you know, focus. So for us, I think as we start to go through this and we go chapter by chapter, we'll be able to utilize this as a tool to say to our prospects in the business category, you're running this trucking firm, you know, and here's a great opportunity in COVID, because people have time. And I'll give you an example. I have read more books in the last 9 months than I've read in the last 9 years. Brent, you've always been reading books. But let me say something. In COVID, how many books have you read?
I average typically 2 a month. Sometimes I'm more motivated and average 4 a month. But I read before bed. I read first thing in the morning before I get up, and I greet the day. You know, so that's my routine.
Absolutely. And so what I say to you is this, is Peter, if you take a look at this book and you were to say, is this something that allows an advisor to say, you know, we're at this point in this book, is there something that makes sense for us to talk about? Or how do we broach the subject?
Okay, so that's really good that you asked that. So I want to share with you, we're a product of our environment. So I've been in the sales business, in the insurance and the financial. So this is a book that's written with us in mind. There's 4 main characters in the book. So let me just, I'm not going to tell you the story if you haven't read it, but there's a young Michael who's an entrepreneur. That's our potential client. There's an older gentleman that we all wish we had as a client. He's like super uber successful. However, I was very cognitive that these guys are appreciative and rely on 2 advisors, trusted advisors, this guy Mitch and this guy Richard. And the thing is, as they're reading the book, our entrepreneurial client, the business owner, is going to relate with either being Michael or Harold or a combination of both. And I want to share with you, like, you know, I spend a lot of time reflecting and having internal conversations with myself. So back in, I guess, 1999, I was invited to something similar to this, but it was just a one-off. And there was a gentleman, his name was Graydon Waters. And in the early days of the mutual fund investment industry, he was one of these people who wrote books in Canada, and he wrote a book called How to Choose a Financial Advisor. And I remember reading that book, and I remember reaching out to Graydon because he had been a really successful advisor. He had like 2,000 clients or customers, because if you have that many clients, you really have only customers, right? Because you can only handle so many. But he had gotten out of his business, but he had actually written this book, How to Choose a Financial Advisor. You know, and it became somewhat popular because this was the day and age that no one really had a financial advisor. You know, it was the Wild West, right? Product salesmen would call themselves financial advisors, and there wasn't the CFP and there wasn't any of that stuff. That being said, I spoke to Greg and he said, you know what you could do, Peter? And I said, what? He said, you know what successful advisors have been doing? They give these books, How to Choose a Financial Advisor, to prospects and clients, because he said anybody would give a book How to Choose a Financial Advisor really has balls. I'm sorry, I said that online. They basically, because they're saying I'm that person. And I thought about that to myself. I said, okay, that anyone who gives this book to discuss this is actually someone who's able to go down that path. For example, you don't go to a therapist who's never had any problems, because how will they actually be able to show empathy to you and things like that? Like, actually, so psychologically, the person who's receiving this book from you, and we're going to be talking about how people are using it, psychologically, someone who gives us to the book and said, I like to discuss it, it's someone you're actually saying to them that, you know, there's some substance here, more than just me selling you something. That's one. Number two, there's little moments in our life that happen and we meet someone and we can't remember who they are, but something significant comes out of it. And this is where this book was an obsession. I just met with a vice president of a company called Vistage, which actually has executives and CEOs. They're located in San Diego. Their businesses do $5 trillion a year, you know, and I was meeting with them, and he was asking me the same questions that you're asking me about the book, you know, because he's 60 years old. The book hit him psychologically, because I read over, 300 books or 250 books on aging. I was obsessed with it. I was like, because I like everyone else, I don't want to die. I just want to know how I can avoid it. I found out you can't. You just have to get comfortable, go with the flow, and just realize that, enjoy the moment, right? So here's the story which I wanted to capture in my book. I was 25 years old and I was starving financial advisor. I had like very little money. I was invited to this place where I met this girl and she was in medical school, and we're talking, we're going to go, she's taking some course and we're going to go out on a date later on around like 8:30. So it's early in the morning, or maybe it's the day before. I can't remember specifically, but she says to me, I'm reading a book. It's called Siddhartha. It is an incredible book. So what happened is I ran to the world's largest bookstore. You guys are all in Toronto, right? Yeah, that's the best book. That was the best bookstore. And it had at least one copy of everything. And I lived there for maybe 20 years until the day they closed it. So the book's name was Siddhartha, and it was written by Hermann Hesse. He won a Nobel Prize. The book was written 100 years ago, and it was translated from German into English. I just tore through the book. It was a short book. It was only maybe 120 pages. Like, I just went through the entire arc of it, and it did his therapist, for those of you who do not know, was Carl Jung, like archetypes, everything. So this book was just, it was like the whole story, and it was a metaphor. Siddhartha is also the name of the prince, the Buddha, right? So, and it just arced from one of being young and cocky to old, and basically like saying, I'm going to drown and I'm just going to go and look at the sun and enjoy it. Like, it just went from all those stages. Now, that on that date, I overwhelmed this girl, because like I thought this book was like, how could this guy write such a thing? It had so much life pain. Because I was young and cocky, right? You guys all remember that, young, cocky, whatever. And you think you're the only person ever to think something, right? And I kept on reading that book every year, sometimes twice a year. And I asked myself around 42, 43, and this is like this one of the books that my book is like, a modern day version of. I said, Peter, why do you keep on reading this book? Because every time I reread the book, I was in a different chapter in the book, and I wanted that to the reader. And I thought I was writing this book really for my children, like who their dad was. Maybe, he's not just an insurance salesman. There might have been a little more to him. Like, everybody has more to them, right? A guy who has a company that, I don't know, fixed sewers, like he has more to him. Everybody has more to them, right? And I wrote a line in the book, and this is why the book has touched people, I think. The book was, and I was obsessed with the editing. I spent thousands and thousands of hours myself on the editing, and I hired people to do maybe 2,000 hours of editing. Like, I needed everything to be proper, the tax planning, everything. That no expert would like say, good story, but that's completely wrong. And the line I read was this, that I wrote, and I thought it was so cute when I wrote it, but it really hit me. It said, entrepreneurs give themselves the greatest gift of all, the possibility to self-actualize. I don't say self-actualize, I say the possibility, because these people are running against the environment, and they're proving and things like that. And the thing is, whoever you're dealing with, what I realized, the answer that came to me was, I asked myself at that point, who are you really writing this book for? And I realized I was writing it for the younger me. I was writing it for the me that was going in his last third of his life. And I was also writing it for the younger me that I wish someone actually gave me this book and said, hey kid, I don't have all the answers, but maybe this will help you on your way. How does that translate to your clients? I've had some of the most fascinating conversations with the most wealthiest people on this planet. And we're like, this book, because I was writing really unconsciously, my obsession was writing this book for the younger me, like wishing someone had given it to me. I've had really deep conversations with these people, and some of these people I'm doing some business with, which you guys would call the mega whale cases, where the policies might be $10 million a year for premium. And it's because we had deeper conversations. And if you ask me, how do you get into the market? These are human beings, and I don't care how much money they have. The more money they have, unfortunately, many of them feel that they built gilded cages for themselves, and they lack like, you know, the story of Midas touch, everything he touches turns to gold. It's like, oh, gold, gold. No, think the person's isolated. It's a metaphor for like someone who's really successful. Like they want that human touch, but they can't have it. They're dealing with people, and all these people want is something from them. And really what they want is a conversation, a deep conversation of someone who understands them, somebody who has skill sets to actually help them, you know, make that transition. And that's what we have. We have the skills, but how do you have that deep conversation? Because you're going to pitch something to them that everybody's been pitching to them, but they're not having a deep conversation, because people don't care to know what you know unless they know that you care. So basically, what's come out of this book is these people want someone who gets them. Now, what I hope from this course that that Sebastian is going to be leading you through with the book, you guys are going to have discussions, human discussions, but the book will refocus you to issues that the client that you want to go after deals with. And in essence, you'll be able to have those real discussions. So taking the discussions you had, if, you know, Sebastian, my hope is you're going to go and make, you know, this, like bring out like real life, that the book is just like a focal point, but you'll be able to have such a good experience. You'll want to go and have other people discuss it. You know, when you go to a great restaurant, and I'm hoping my book is like that restaurant, you want other people to try it, and you want to go and talk about, like, I had the salmon and you had the steak. Like, that's what you want to do. And if there's anything that this book is about, and going back to what Charles Brockton said to me, is I was doing what everybody else did to him. I wasn't engaging him in things that mattered to him. And one of the advantages I had when I was a prof and I blew up in my life, and I talk about this, and I read almost every financial book I could get a hold of from whatever publisher had written it. And nothing was dealing with, what do you do after you work? Like, how do you remain spiritually, mentally, and emotionally healthy? And that's something that many people who have never really looked at what, you guys like that noise from the bird?
I thought he was just adding commentary.
Yeah, it is. So this is like, it's gonna go away, guys. This adds character.
Can you ask
right?
him to go on mute, Peter?
Can everyone? I would do, but he's going. Oh my God, that was huge. That what? Guess what that was? That looked like an ego of some kind.
Shows we're live. That's good. We're live.
So I just wanted to share that with you. So you guys are gonna start. How many people have actually started to look at the book? How many people have seen the book?
No, oh yeah, that's right. Bagwin purchased it already, and he got a jump start on us.
Yeah, I also purchased the audiobook. It plays in my car while on my way back to work and to the work. And I've finished first 2 chapters. And actually, as a matter of fact, I had questions to you regarding chapter 12, Know Your Ethics, and chapter 14, which is what is your unique value proposition.
Okay, so that's good, as long as we don't talk about the steal from the story.
We
can talk about that. We can talk about the concepts. We can't talk about what happens in the story. That's a deal?
You bet.
Okay, so the first one, you're asking about your ethics. You know, I have to share something with you that I was very conscious of when I was writing the book. I had a friend, he wrote a book that something was not factually correct, and I just couldn't get over it. It didn't matter about the book. So I was obsessed that if I go and I talk about like a structure or something like that, it was actually correct. So I went to the experts for it. And I also wanted to make sure that the book was timeless, because back in the 90s, I read a book called The Magic of Thinking Big by I think it was like Peter Schwartz, and it was a bestseller. And it starts off the book this way. So I want you to imagine. It says, why do the best salesmen make 10 times more than the average salesman? They make $60,000. I'm sitting there going, $60,000? That's not a lot of money, right? Well, then I looked in and I said, well, the book was like, I turned to the copyright page and I said, this book came out in 1958. So $60,000 is probably the equivalent of $2-3 million now, right? Like the purchasing power. So one of the things that happened with COVID is I kept on asking, is my book out of date? Because I wrote a book that a few months after the government rewrote legislation, and that whole section was, like out of date. And what regarding the ethics section, that's something that's universal, because right now, with much of the stuff happening in this world that we might not agree with, the question is, where do you stand? What clients want is someone who has an opinion, someone who's actually gone within and done the work on themselves. That's really what they want. So about the ethics point, do you know what you really stand for? Do you know like what type of people you're going to deal with? Do you know the people you do the best with? Like I know for a fact, I deal with street fighters. Like I had a gentleman from the Midwest who, he went to private schools and everything, and he deals really well with second generation money. And he wrote a nice paper on it, whatever. And I'm thinking, but I don't deal well with those people. I was a difficult child. My parents had to send me to military school. They were talking it was like half the kids I went to school with, it was like either that or reform school. So I like dealing with people who are a little different thinking, but whatever, they became successful. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if Rodney Dangerfield had a movie called Going Back to School, and there was this really uptight guy who was teaching business, and then Rodney Dangerfield said, no, that's not the way it works. You got to pay this guy off, you got to pay that guy off, you got to do this and that. This is a right. Well, this guy here has got a pension working for an Ivy League university. He's teaching business, and this guy is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's famous, right? Because what he did. So in essence, I like dealing with those people. So getting back to the ethic part, you got to at least know, you got to have an opinion, because a person with an opinion is very attractive. Not everyone's going to like you, but there's so many people on this planet, you don't need everyone to like you. And that's the problem with most people in our business. They want everyone to like them. No, not everyone's going to like you, and be proud of it, because you are a distinct human being. And you want to communicate it, and you want your clients to also appreciate that, and you'll appreciate them, because I wrote about also later on in the book about spiritual vampires. And many of you know that your first clients are your worst clients, right? Because you don't know who you are, so you don't know how to set boundaries, right? And I spent a lot of time looking about that. Well, the fact is, you're knowing your ethics, then you're able to identify those people who drain you, because you know what you stand for, and you're able to identify, well, that person, the reason I don't like them so much is because, and they drain me because we don't share the same values. We don't have the same outlook. We don't want to be in the same place. So then you're able to now ask the next question: how do I find those people? How do I make myself more attractive? How do I let those people know how to find me? Like, these are really important questions that someone needs to ask themselves. And it goes back to, when you meet, let me tell you the difference between what I call a business creator and their prodigy that's a PhD. Sebastian, David, Brent, what's a PhD? You read my book. I'm testing it. It's not someone who goes and gets. It's not like one of these people here. What's a PhD? Sebastian, what is a PhD?
You got
Papa has dough.
Yeah, that's right.
So let me explain why, if you do the work on yourself, you're going to be able to deal with the whales. Because these people here, no one gave them anything. They got there because they were dealing with ever increasing levels of complexity. And if they built something from nothing, and they have, let's say, a business that's worth $100 million, they've had to actually understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. They've had to also been able to identify people to delegate to be able to grow to something beyond themselves. So anybody who has more than 30 people working for them, they've had to actually delegate and build a business system. And why do I say this? Because when they look at a person, they're able to see if there's something happening but behind the eyes. And unlike someone who might just, been spoiled their entire life and you have a great golf game, these people can tell people who are able to understand them, and people who are also at that level where they've questioned enough in their lives. And that's what they're attracted to. And again, they've spent their time building their wealth and their business in a certain area. And one thing I want to impress upon all of you is they haven't built it in this area. And the problem that a lot of advisors have, and I was guilty too, I would say, oh, he's so successful, he doesn't need me. He must have this all taken care of. Well, let me share with you something. I had a really interesting conversation with this gentleman who ran the public trustee money for Ontario. And he was telling me a story. This woman died interstate and left $70 million that was being managed by the public trustee, and that happened 2 weeks before. So here's someone who was worth $70 million, and probably everyone made the assumption that she had planning. She didn't have planning. And he said, you know how many people don't have planning? He said, we're managing $4 billion at the Ontario Public Trustee. That means there's $4 billion worth of estates that are the person's dying interstate because nobody sat down and had a conversation with them and worked through it with them. And they needed one of us. So don't think that everybody's knocking on their doors. Like studies have shown that like 100 people will apply for a low-end job and very few people apply for the top job. So don't make that assumption. But what I'm going to suggest and what I hope you get from the book is many of the questions that like the conversations you're going to have with the client based on, what you guys discuss in the book, you also, come to your own understanding of how you'll answer those questions. So getting back to Graydon Waters, who wrote that book, How to Choose a Financial Advisor, when I read that book, I couldn't answer any of those questions to the affirmative. Like, why would someone want to deal with me rather than someone else? So I sat down and I answered those questions, and I wrote down, I went through a plan saying, what would I need to do to be able to answer it like this? And then I actually went about doing it. I got designations. I changed how I presented myself, the market that I was dealing with. I wrote out my value system. I did all these things so I could sit down with a client who I would hand that book to, that I could answer the questions that the book was saying that you should be asking the advisor when you're choosing him or her. And that was really the purpose of the book. And more importantly, it's not like people ask me, Peter, how do you get to the whale? Like, do I just show up and the person says, yeah, I'm going to work with you. You're an awesome guy, Peter. It's never about timing. Rarely is it ever about timing. It's about time. It's about investing in people. Just you have to invest in the right people. So if you want to catch salmon, I love this analogy, you don't go to the Humber River. You go to the mouth of the Simon Fraser. So you have to actually know who you are, what you have to offer, and then you have to ask, who can I best serve? And then the question goes, where do I have the best chance of finding those people? It could be at a Walmart. I don't know. It could be at Holt Renfrew's. I don't know. You know your client or the person that is attracted to you. And one thing I will leave with you is you also have to listen to what your environment is telling you. I deal with street fighters because guess what? I never did well with PhDs. Maybe my contempt just showed because I wasn't one, but I never did well. And there were certain things when I would talk about estate planning and taxation and savings, I saw the eyes go off on these business owners. They did not care about Tesla or whatever because they were in the game themselves. They weren't buying a ticket to the game. And let me explain what that is, because this is why what we do is so important. Most business owners, and most people don't know this, most of their money is tied up in their business accounts in GICs and cash in banks. That's a fact. So at RBC, there happens to be 20 to 30 times more millionaires sitting in the branches than are actually sitting in the brokerages. Because these people here, when they take a risk, they know to leverage their risks. They're all equities. If I have a client who's worth $100 million, has a business that's worth $100 million, the broker's going to look at it and say, oh, he's got 5 million sitting in cash. Oh, he should diversify, right? It should be 60% equity and 40%. They're not seeing the whole picture and saying, no, he's only 4% fixed income, cash. The rest is in equity. So what they want more than anything is for you to plan for them, to help them, that they're able to protect their money. They took the risk, and they don't want to take risks at the end of their lives.
I don't understand if everyone got that point again. So just reiterate that point one more time, because I think it's so pertinent.
Which one? Because I have verbal.
The fact of business owners or wealthy individuals being risk adverse as they get closer to that magic number.
Well, to us, to the outside advisor, the ones who are really successful have always been risk averse. And I want to share with you when I learned that. When I was young and I was selling investments, and I went to I went to a really successful business guy, and I was showing him like, hey, this is what I can do with all your money. Because all I could see is like, hey, he's got like $3 million sitting at CIBC. Look what I could do with it. I can earn a max. And this guy's worth a lot of money. It's probably like, that was only maybe about 5 to 10% of his wealth. And he turns to me and he says two things to me. He says, the stuff you sell, Peter, it's for someone like an accountant, a doctor, a pharmacist, whatever, because they are buying a ticket to the game. And that's the real economy, right? Like, businesses participate. I'm already in the game. He said that one. He said, number two, I put my family at enough risk. This money is for security. Because I'm fully invested. I take risks every day with hiring, firing, tax planning, all this different stuff, like acquisitions, growing my business. And people go and say, well, you have one business, you should diversify. Good business people, they are diversified, but they understand what they're doing. However, when they're transitioning out, that's when they need people. And you got to, just because someone made a lot of money with their business, they have a certain skill set. I might be a good singer, but a terrible dancer. I'm not just, I could be the world-class singer, but I'm like, I fall over my feet. So that's the assumption people make, that these people here have they can transfer those skills to other things. Maybe they can, the majority of us can't. So they're going to rely on you, and they're going to be looking at not wealth creation. They know how to make money. You want to learn how to make money? You go to these people who took nothing and created something. They're turning to you to maintain it and distribute it and protect it. And the one thing which I identified when I was doing my research is there was very little dealing with the transition from, running at 1,000 miles an hour to transitioning from that part of your life of accumulating to the rest of your life and distribution of it, and making sure that you are not a burden to other people. Because that's really what people are concerned of. Many business owners work really hard because they don't want to be a burden on other people. And they want to go in like, they want their family to have the highest quality life possible. And that when they turn to you, they're saying, help me make that transition. Help me make sure I'm not a burden to those I love, and help me with my financials to leave a legacy if they're so inclined. But that's really what they want. They're not going to say, hey, tell me what's happening with stocks in China, or tell me what's going to happen with the euro and things like that. They're not interested. I'll share, you guys might know Clarington Mutual Funds. Clarington Mutual Funds is really interested. This is before it was taken over by Industrial Alliance. It was created by a gentleman named Terry Stone. Now, Terry Stone, the stuff he would send out to brokers and all that stuff, he was talking to real human beings about real human problems. at that time, and he had a fraction of the budget of Templeton, Fidelity, all the big players. However, he was considered the number 2 for, pieces. Like, people remembered him because he was speaking to people where they lived. He wasn't talking mountain charts and what was happening in Asia, or technology, or telecommunications, or infrastructure. He was talking about real people and the real issues. And what's incredible about being in the insurance business, dealing with the second, like the worst case scenario, the transition, is we are the best suited to have those conversations. Stockbrokers don't have that discussion. Think about what we do. Like, let's really look at it. You're getting their health information. So they're disclosing their health information. Like honestly, that's for many people, that's the most private thing ever, right? They're disclosing it, and their financials. Think about what they're doing. They don't do that even to their doctor. The doctor, they tell them their medical. To their broker, they tell them their financial. You are getting the most intimate information, and you have to be trustworthy to deal with it and actually be invested to those people. And I'm going to share with you. I walked away from a gentleman this year who's worth $2 billion in Canada. And I walked away with him because I didn't like him. Because you know what, all you have is your time. So you want to invest in these people. And guess what? These people, if you invest in them, they have an invested interest in you for you being successful. And, birds of a feather flock together. They're going to go and bring in other people to discuss with you. And you don't need a lot. Seriously, I only sell 2 to 5 cases a year, if that. I can't sell more than that. And I don't want to. And the cases I write, like the underwriting's like this big, because we have to justify why they're applying for insurance. But the truth is, I like the people I deal with. It's not about the money. It's like, I've taken on this responsibility. It's like when you're a young kid, you think about the money you're going to make. You know what I think right now? The goddamn responsibility I'm taking, because I've been in the business long enough to know that I do X. It's going to haunt me in 20 years. So it's a huge responsibility. And getting back to the book, how do you have those deep conversations of what someone really wants? Have you guys ever seen Citizen Kane? Yep. Sebastian. Okay, so see, this is the reason why I think it's the greatest movie ever, is the metaphor or the symbolism. So it's about really Hearst, who is like one of the wealthiest men in the world, and Orson Welles was sued by him. So really what it's about is this gentleman is trying to figure out what this wealthy man's last words meant, and it was Snowball. It was Snowball. And then they go to the beginning when he's a little kid, and he's can you guys hear that? I'm now in a really good traffic zone right now during lunch. So they're looking for what Snowball means, and they go back to the early part of his life, and he's out in like the oil fields, and he's sledding, and he's pulled away into this world, this proper world and whatever, and he never has real relationships. And they look at his life, and it's a sad, miserable life. And then the guy who's writing the story says, we'll never know what Snowball meant, like what his last words meant. And then they turn to a warehouse where they're throwing things that belong to him into a furnace, like, things that no one wanted. And there's the sled he was riding at the beginning of when he was a child. It's got Snowball written on it, and it's thrown in. See, those are the things that are important to these people, but everybody else in his entire life had a superficial relationship. And that's what I hope the book does. If anything, I bring up topics, but it's your responsibility to have real conversations with the client, because that's what real people want. They want to connect with human beings. And during COVID, those conversations are more important than ever, because people need to connect.
Peter, this has been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I know we've had a couple of other ones before, but this has been the best conversation we've had. And it reminds me of yesterday when I met with Manjinder. We spoke about the exact same thing. You know what? COVID is great and all for being efficient, but we need that personal touch. We need to see your eyes in front of us, you know, and to be in that proximity. So, you know, kudos for this. Thank you for this time. And we're gonna, you know, keep you up to date on as we progress. And we're gonna have questions. We're gonna come back to you, and we're gonna really refine this. And I took away a lot of notes from our conversation, and I thank you again for this time. Manjinder,
can I share with you my wish?
Go ahead.
So I had a conversation with a gentleman today, and you know, he runs a very significant organization. Like his members do about $5 trillion worth of business, whatever. And I'll tell you where my high was, because he asked me, what do I want? And the thing is, I really don't know what I want, but I do know what I want. I spent to see, it was important for me to share what I had learned. So the greatest thing that I hope from you guys is the book touches you like it touched me writing it, because I get excited to hear feedback to how it touched the reader. Because, you know, because writing is a solitary activity. And what would even be greater, if the book is good enough, I would love an Amazon review, because I always like for Amazon reviews, it helps me. At the same time, that if you have a good experience with it, it makes you ask deeper questions. I would feel honored if you were to go and take the book or start something similar to what Sebastian is doing, and, you know, get a group of people together and do and take that experience and you lead it. Yeah. You know, where itself, I'll leave one last thing. I belong to many executive groups and things like that. I'll tell you the best one I ever had, it was Toastmasters. And why? Because it was inexpensive and it was people who just wanted to improve. And in essence, the book is $19.98. You know, it's like I priced it in Canadian dollars at that, because I didn't want a barrier to entry, because my last textbook was $250. I mean, that's what they were charging. Basically, that would be the greatest thing that would come out of this, that you would feel that you had such a good experience with Sebastian and the team at Equitable Life, and you actually got to see overall, not just like your clients or who your prospects are, but also understood yourself in this mix together, that you would take it out to other people and they would do it. And that for me is, you know, that to me is the only thing that's all I want out of this.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank